Your problem is you're just too picky. That's why you're still single at 32. My mother's text glared up at me from my phone as I sat in my car outside my Aunt Bethany's sprawling colonial in Naperville, Illinois, the quarterly Peterson family gathering, where careers were measured, relationships scrutinized, and life choices dissected with surgical precision. I smoothed down my navy pencil skirt and checked my lipstick in the rearview mirror. Director of marketing at 32 wasn't enough for the Petersons, not without a husband and at least one baby on the way. The fact that I'd climbed the corporate ladder at Meridian Healthcare through sheer determination and talent meant little compared to my cousin Melissa's twins or my cousin Brandon's perfect fiancé. My phone buzzed again. Don't be late. Ryan is so looking forward to meeting you. Ryan Whitaker, son of my father's golf buddy, recently divorced, and supposedly quite the catch, according to everyone in my family who'd never actually met him. After years of dodging their setups, I'd finally caved. A blind date with a built-in audience of 20 judgmental relatives. What could possibly go wrong? The autumn air bit at my skin as I made my way up the brick pathway. Maple leaves crunched beneath my heels, and the scent of my aunt's famous pot roast wafted from inside. Before I could knock, the door swung open to reveal Melissa, married with twins at 27, her face a mixture of pity and excitement. "Oh, thank God you're here, Avery. Everyone's waiting. Ryan arrived 20 minutes ago." She lowered her voice to a whisper. "He's gorgeous, like really gorgeous, and he drives a Tesla. Great. Strike one. I was already the villain in this story." The living room fell silent when I entered. Aunts, uncles, and cousins perched on overstuffed furniture, nursing glasses of my uncle's famous bourbon punch. Family photos crowded every surface. Wedding pictures, baby christenings, graduation ceremonies, a visual timeline of the Peterson definition of success. And there, in the center of it all, was Ryan, tall, conventionally handsome in that Midwestern insurance salesman way, holding court with my father and uncles. Just closed the Hendrickson account. Biggest in the firm's history, he was saying, voice carrying that particular blend of humble and boastful that men like him perfect by age 30. My mother materialized at my side, her floral perfume enveloping me before her arm did. "There you are. Ryan's been telling us all about his investment strategy. Did you know he manages portfolios for 3 professional athletes?" I hadn't known because I'd never met the man before this moment. But already I could feel the collective weight of family expectation pressing down. This was success. This was what I should aspire to catch. "Sorry I'm late," I said, extending my hand toward Ryan. "Traffic on Route 59 was terrible." He looked at my outstretched hand with amusement before pulling me into an unwanted hug. "The famous Avery Peterson. Your mom's been showing me your old prom photos." My cheeks burned as everyone laughed. My mother beamed, delighted at this apparent chemistry. I caught a whiff of expensive cologne and whiskey on his breath. "Dinner's ready." Aunt Bethany called from the dining room, saving me from having to respond. I found myself strategically placed beside Ryan at the massive oak dining table. My youngest cousin had been relegated to the kids' table in the kitchen to make this seating arrangement possible. The table gleamed with my aunt's best china and silverware, the set reserved for holidays and special occasions. Apparently, my blind date qualified. "So," Ryan said loud enough for most of the table to hear, "your mom tells me you're some kind of marketing person? That must be fun, making brochures and stuff." I took a sip of wine, counting to 3 in my head. "I'm actually director of marketing for Meridian Healthcare. We just launched a campaign that increased patient enrollment by 40%. "That's nice," he said dismissively, ladling gravy onto his mashed potatoes. "I told your dad about the investment opportunity I mentioned. Very exclusive. Minimum buy-in is 50 grand, but I might be able to get him in at 40. My father nodded enthusiastically from across the table. "Ryan's been giving me some excellent advice. Maybe you should listen too, Avery. You're always talking about wanting to buy a place in the city, but with those downtown Chicago prices..." He trailed off, shaking his head. "Actually, I closed on a condo in Lincoln Park last month," I said. "I was going to announce it tonight." The table fell silent. My mother recovered first, her fork suspended midair. "But you never mentioned, why wouldn't you tell us something so important?" Because every major decision I'd ever made had been met with criticism wrapped in concern. My master's degree, couldn't you find a husband in college? My promotion, such long hours, no wonder you're single. My solo trip to Portugal last year, so dangerous for a woman alone. It happened quickly, I lied. I'd been planning it for a year, carefully saving and researching neighborhoods. I'd visited 17 properties before finding the perfect one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. Well, Ryan jumped in, spearing a piece of roast beef. Downtown living is great when you're young, but once you have a family, the suburbs are much more practical. You'll figure that out eventually. The assumptions in that statement made my teeth clench, but I smiled tightly. I'd learned years ago that direct confrontation at family gatherings only labeled me as oversensitive or dramatic. Avery's always done things her own way, my Aunt Bethany said, in the same tone she might use to describe an eccentric pet. Remember when she cut her hair super short in college? Or when she turned down that nice boy Bradley to take that job in Boston? My uncle added. The one that laid off half their staff 6 months later, my mother reminded everyone. Thank goodness she'd come to her senses by then and moved back home. I hadn't come to my senses. The Boston job had been a stepping stone that led to my current position, a detail I'd explained countless times to deaf ears. And Bradley had cheated on me with my roommate, another detail conveniently forgotten in the family narrative. Sometimes the path less traveled leads to interesting places, I offered, cutting my roast beef into precise squares. Ryan laughed loudly. Or to being 32 and eating Thanksgiving dinner alone. No offense, he added with a wink that made my skin crawl. Several relatives chuckled. My mother shot me a warning look that clearly said, don't ruin this. So, Ryan, my father said, eager to change the subject, Melissa mentioned you have a place up in Lake Geneva. Family vacation home, Ryan confirmed, puffing up slightly. Though it's mine now, after the divorce. Speaking of which, he turned to me. Your mom mentioned you've never been married. Never found the right guy, or just difficult to please? The table collectively held its breath. This was the moment I was supposed to laugh self-deprecatingly, maybe touch his arm and say something flirtatious. Instead, I took another sip of wine. I haven't found someone worth rearranging my life for yet. Avery has very high standards, my mother interjected with a nervous laugh. Nothing wrong with high standards, Ryan said, as long as they're realistic. I mean, at some point you have to look in the mirror and ask if you're being, reasonable. My cousin Melissa giggled. Ryan? You can't say things like that. But he just said exactly what most of them had been thinking for years. That my singleness was a personal failing, a result of being too choosy, too career-focused, too independent. Well, I think Avery's career success is wonderful, my Aunt Patricia said, the family's token progressive voice. It's not the 1950s anymore. No argument here, Ryan said, holding up his hands. I'm all for women's lib and career gals. My ex-wife's a pharmaceutical rep. But there's a reason we split, Some women just struggle with balance. He went on, gaining steam with each nod of agreement from my family. I'm just saying there's a time and place. Business Avery probably does great in the boardroom, but might be a little intense for a relationship. No offense. Because you know so much about me after 20 minutes, I said quietly, feeling a familiar heat rising in my chest. The same sensation I'd felt in countless meetings when men had talked over me or claimed my ideas as their own. I know your type, he countered with unearned confidence. I've dated career women before. Always checking emails, always networking. It's exhausting. Men want someone who's present, Someone who makes them feel important. My father raised his glass. Well said, Ryan. Avery's just independent, my mother offered apologetically. She'll settle down when she meets the right person. If she lets herself, Ryan added with a chuckle. Some women get so set in their ways they can't compromise. Then they wonder why they're still single at 40. The room erupted in laughter, and something inside me snapped. All those years of nodding and smiling through their judgment. All those passive-aggressive comments about my choices. All for what? To be humiliated by this stranger they'd placed on a pedestal without knowing the first thing about him? I smiled. Not the tight, polite smile I usually wore at these gatherings, but a genuine one that seemed to catch Ryan off guard. That's an interesting perspective, Ryan, especially coming from you. His eyebrows rose slightly. What's that supposed to mean? Just that for someone so concerned about relationship balance, your own track record is complicated. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. Everyone has a past. Indeed. I pulled out my phone. You mentioned your divorce. Was that Janet or Stephanie? The color drained from his face. I'm a marketing director, Ryan. Background research is literally my job. This wasn't entirely true. What was true was that I'd Googled him last night out of morbid curiosity, and what I'd found had been illuminating. 2 divorces before 35 is quite an achievement. My mother's eyes widened. Avery, that's inappropriate. Is it? More inappropriate than setting me up with someone and not mentioning his multiple marriages? Or his suspension from the Illinois Securities Division last year? The room went still. My father's forehead creased. What suspension? It was a misunderstanding, Ryan said quickly, his charm evaporating. Paperwork issue, all resolved. The Securities Division website uses phrases like material misrepresentation and failure to disclose conflicts of interest, I said, scrolling through my phone. There's a whole section about client restitution. My father's face darkened. You never mentioned any of this when we discussed my investments. Because it's irrelevant, Ryan snapped. Ancient history. Who hasn't had a minor regulatory issue? People who don't defraud clients? I suggested, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. Ryan's composed facade cracked. Listen, you don't know what you're talking about. This is exactly what I meant. You're being difficult and inappropriate. By doing basic due diligence, the kind anyone should do before investing $50,000 or, I don't know, setting up their daughter? I looked at my parents, whose expressions had shifted from embarrassment to concern. You're twisting things, Ryan said, his voice rising. This is why you're alone. You attack people who are just trying to help you. I laughed genuinely for the first time that evening. Help me? You've spent this entire dinner condescending to me and implying I'm defective because I prioritized my career over finding someone like you. I never said. You didn't have to. It's what everyone at this table has been saying to me for years. I looked around at my stunned family members, and honestly, I've tolerated it because I love you all and thought maybe you were right. Maybe I was missing something. I turned back to Ryan, but then I meet the kind of man you all think I should settle for, and it turns out he's a twice-divorced financial advisor with a disciplinary record who still needs to insult successful women to feel good about himself. That's enough, my mother hissed, her knuckles white around her water glass. Actually, it's not, I continued, a lifetime of swallowed retorts finally finding voice. Because while we're all being honest, there's also the DUI from 2019 and the tax lien on that Lake Geneva property you claim to own outright. Ryan stood abruptly, napkin falling to the floor. I don't have to listen to this. You're completely out of line. That's exactly what the Securities Division said, I replied calmly. He turned to my parents. I thought you said she was normal. This, he gestured at me, is exactly why women like her end up alone. Too smart for their own good. As he stormed toward the door, my father called after him. Ryan, wait, what about the investment opportunity? The front door slammed in response, rattling the family photos on the entryway wall. In the silence that followed, I calmly took another bite of Aunt Bethany's roast beef. It was overcooked, as always. Well, my mother finally said, her voice trembling, I hope you're satisfied. You've embarrassed this entire family. I set down my fork. No, Mom, you embarrassed me by trying to set me up with someone you hadn't bothered to vet, all because you're so desperate to see me paired off that anyone with a pulse and a penis would do. Cousin Melissa gasped dramatically, hand flying to her pearl necklace, a gift from her husband on their 5th anniversary, as she'd mentioned at least 3 times tonight. That's not fair, my father said, though he looked uneasy. We just want to see you happy. Happy by whose definition? Because I was happy before I walked in here tonight. I'm successful in a career I love. I just bought my dream condo. I have great friends. The only time I feel like a failure is at these family gatherings where my accomplishments count for nothing because I don't have a husband. We're proud of your career, my mother protested weakly. Are you? Because you introduced me as still working in marketing to Aunt Patricia earlier, like it's a phase I'm going through. I manage a department of 15 people and a 7-figure budget. I've doubled our company's market share in 3 years. My uncle cleared his throat. No one's saying that's not impressive, Avery. But it's not enough, I finished for him. It's never been enough. To my surprise, my Aunt Patricia spoke up. She's right, you know. All heads turned toward her. We do this to her every time. The questions about dating, the setups, the backhanded compliments about her cute little apartment, and how she's married to her job. Thank you, I said, genuinely surprised. She continued, remember when she won that industry award last year? We spent 5 minutes congratulating her and an hour asking if she'd met anyone at the ceremony. Several family members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. My cousin Brandon studied his plate intensely. Aunt Bethany fiddled with her napkin. My mother's lips thinned. We just don't want her to wake up one day and regret her choices. That's the thing, Mom, I said more gently. These are my choices to make. My life to live, my potential regrets to have, and for the record, I'd regret settling for someone like Ryan Whitaker far more than I'd regret being single. But you just humiliated a guest in our home, Aunt Bethany said, still clutching her pearls over my outburst. A guest who called me difficult and inappropriate for stating facts, I countered. Would you have preferred I sit quietly while he insulted me and tried to scam Dad out of $50,000? My father cleared his throat. Is that investment opportunity really questionable? Look it up yourself, Dad. The company's called Whitaker Capital Partners. Multiple complaints with the Better Business Bureau. There's a reason he can only get clients through personal connections now. He pulled out his phone immediately, and I suppressed a smile. Dad had always been paranoid about financial scams, ever since his brother lost a chunk of his retirement to a Ponzi scheme in the early 2000s. I still think there were better ways to handle this, my mother insisted, though with less conviction. My cousin Melissa, surprising everyone including herself, spoke up. Actually, I thought it was kind of badass. When everyone stared at her, she shrugged. What? It was. He was being a jerk, and Avery called him out. I wish I could do that sometimes. You're happily married, my mother reminded her. To a man who criticizes my cooking in front of his parents and forgets our anniversary every year, Melissa replied, then immediately looked shocked at her own admission. I mean, I love Todd, but marriage isn't perfect. Being married doesn't mean being happy, just like being single doesn't mean being sad. The table fell into stunned silence. Finally, my father looked up from his phone. Jesus Christ, this guy has 3 tax liens and a bankruptcy from 2018, and his firm was fined $150,000 for misrepresentation last year. He looked at me with newfound respect. How did you find all this out? Google, Dad. It's amazing what people put online these days. The atmosphere in the room shifted subtly. My father kept reading about Ryan's dubious business practices aloud, each revelation causing more gasps. My mother's embarrassment gradually transformed into relief that she hadn't successfully paired me with such a person. Aunt Bethany started serving dessert, muttering about how that man had unusually small hands anyway. As the evening progressed, the conversation naturally turned to other topics. My cousin asked genuine questions about my new condo. My uncle wanted to know more about my job. For the first time at a family gathering, I felt no need to downplay my success or apologize for my choices. For the first time, I felt seen by my family, not as a problem to be solved, but as a person who had built a life they were finally beginning to respect. Back at my condo that night, I kicked off my heels and poured myself a glass of the expensive Cabernet I'd been saving for a special occasion. Standing at my window, watching the city lights glitter against the night sky, I realized I'd changed something fundamental. Not just for me, but maybe for Melissa too. And who knows who else? By refusing to accept the narrative they'd written for me, I'd created space for others to question theirs. 3 months later, I hosted the next family gathering at my new Lincoln Park condo. I'd spent weeks preparing, choosing the perfect furniture, practicing recipes, selecting wines, not to impress them, but to welcome them properly into the life I'd built. The view of the Chicago skyline through my floor-to-ceiling windows drew admiring comments, as did the sophisticated decor I'd chosen. My mother still made one comment about the second bedroom being perfect for a nursery someday, but it lacked the usual urgency. "This place is gorgeous," Melissa said, joining me on the balcony with a glass of wine. She'd left her husband at home, a small act of independence that hadn't gone unnoticed. "Thanks. It feels good to have everyone here." "You change things, she said quietly. "After that dinner with Ryan, it's like you gave everyone permission to question the script we've all been following." I raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "Well, I started marriage counseling. Patricia's daughter just deferred college to travel in Southeast Asia, and no one gave her grief about it. Even your mom told Mrs. Whitaker at the grocery store that her son was unsuitable and should work on himself before pursuing relationships." I laughed, picturing my proper mother delivering such a verdict. "And Uncle Doug asked me about my promotion yesterday," I added. Not as a segue to asking about my dating life, but because he was genuinely interested. "Exactly," Melissa nodded. "It's I don't know, like we're being seen as whole people now, not just our relationship status." Inside, my family moved around my space, admiring the life I'd built on my own terms. No one had asked when I was going to settle down or mentioned any eligible bachelors they knew. Instead, they asked about my recent promotion, my plans for the spare room, a home office I'd decided, and my upcoming business trip to London. As I looked out over the city, my city, I felt a profound sense of peace, not because I'd won some battle against my family's expectations, but because I'd finally stopped fighting against myself. I'd stopped apologizing for the choices that made me happy. The true victory wasn't in embarrassing Ryan Whitaker or even in changing my family's perspective. It was in fully embracing the life I'd chosen and recognizing its value, not despite being single, but regardless of it. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Dinner was lovely. Your father and I are so proud of you." No qualifiers, no suggestions, just pride. I smiled and typed back, "Thank you. That means everything." And it did. Because while I didn't need their approval to validate my choices, having their support made the journey sweeter. The road less traveled was still my road, but now at least they could see where it had led me. Not to loneliness or regret, but to strength, fulfillment, and a life built on my own terms.